Welcome. And today being Sunday, a nice, beautiful day outside, thunderstorm watch up for our area here. Uh, we'll get together and talk a little bit about railroading. And I'll start off with talking about my trip on the White Pass and Yukon route back in mid June, and I really enjoyed the ride. So let's talk a bit about what the White Pass and Yukon route is. And of course, it runs from Skagway, Alaska, up toward Lake Bennett, and it was quite a bit of track going up that way. And it was one of the, I guess it was the first route that let you get up to the Yukon in terms of train. Otherwise, you had to hike in and such, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But the map here shows you the route as it is today from Skagway at sea level to about 2,800 feet at White Pass, and that's where the current train stops and does a runaround and takes you back to Skagway. So it's about a three-hour deal, if you will. In 1896, when gold was found in the Bonanza Creek by a gentleman by the name of George Carmack and two First Nation companions, Shukum John and Dawson Charlie, resulting in the start of the Klondike Gold Rush. A gentleman by the name of Captain William Moore was hired by a Canadian survey party headed by William O'Gleavy there, who had been commissioned to map the 141st meridian, the boundary between the United States and Canada. The original route was known as the Chilcote Pass, which was so rugged and so rough that the two decided to head north over an uncharted ground to seek an easier route to the interior, to the Yukon. And they reached Lake Bennett near the headwaters of the Yukon River, named the new route the White Pass for the Canadian Minister of the Interior at the time, Sir Thomas White. The Seattle Post newspaper broadcast the news of the discovery of gold in the Canadian Klondike with a headline of "Gold, Gold, Gold" in July 17th, 1887. And thousands of gold-crazed people steamed up the Inside Passage waterway to arrive in Dahlia and Skagway to begin the overland trek to the Klondike over 600 miles of treacherous and dangerous trails and waterways. Some of the prospectors chose a shorter route but steeper Chilcote Trail. And for safety reasons, the government required each person to require a ton of supplies on their trip up the Golden Stairs to the summit of the Chilcote Pass. Others chose the White Pass Trail, believing the pack animals could be used and would be easier way to get to the summit. And 3,000 horses died on the White Pass Trail during the time that it was used to the tortures and inexperience of the people who were stampeding up there. In the fall of 1897, George Brackett, who was a former construction engineer with the Norfolk Pacific Railway, built a 12-mile toll road up the canyon of the White Pass. The road became a failure because the travelers ignored the toll gates and he wasn't getting any tolls, so he couldn't pay for it, so it fell flat on its face. But in 1898, two men appeared on the scene with essentially the same idea. To build a railroad through the White Pass. And these two gentlemen, Sir Thomas Tancred, who was representing investors in London, and a Michael Haney, an experienced railroad contractor, was interested in finding a new work for his talents, joined forces, met by a chance in Skagway at a bar, and decided to talk and said, "We need a railway." And well, they made it happen. So in April of 1898, they paid Brackett $100,000 in two separate payments of $60,000 and $50,000 for the right-of-way for his toll road. And part of that toll road became the route for the railroad, the White Pass and Yukon. In May of 1898, yep, the construction started with a new 3-foot narrow gauge railway. The gauge was selected to ease the problems of construction, reduce costs, and of course, as we can see by the pictures, a little steepness there, so something difficult to deal with in terms of the grades and such. So they couldn't really do a lot of blasting to make it the standard gauge. They decided to go narrow gauge to make things a little bit better and be able to make the turns around the contours, if you will, a little easier. So it was originally organized to be separated into three different entities. Part of it was going to be the Pacific and Arctic Railway and Navigation Company in Alaska for 20.4 miles. Next 32.2 miles was a part of the British Columbia Yukon Railway Company in British Columbia. Then the British Yukon Railway Company in the Yukon Territory. This segment was projected to go to Fort Selkirk, but eventually it terminated at Whitehorse, 58.1 miles from the territorial border. So you can see that the White Pass was essentially three different railways, but eventually they combined into one. We had the Scenic Company come apart, and also the other companies got bought out, if you will. A gentleman by the name of Hawkins from Denver, Colorado, came to Skagway to take charge of the work to build this railway. By mid-July, the first locomotive in Alaska, 260 number 2, was purchased from a Utah short line and arrived on the railway, and it was the first locomotive to run on the rails. Construction of the White Pass in Yukon started in the Skagway during the spring of 1898. This photo is showing construction up the center of Broadway on June 15th. And within 8 months, the rails would reach the White Pass summit, 20.4 miles from Skagway at an elevation of 2,915 feet. And at no time during the construction period were there fewer than 1,000 men employed, and the figure often was between 1,800 and 2,000 being used for construction. Obstacles facing the builders were almost unprecedented. A mountain rising defiantly, buried in the snowdrifts up to 30 feet deep.
Much better.
Good. Okay, so no surveys have been completed. No materials on site were something they could use, so they had to bring all the material in. So Hawkins and a contractor, Michael Haney, brought in an army of men from the United States, created a commissary to feed them, and purchased $200,000 worth of supplies to equip the construction gangs. And here we see a picture of some of the troops, if you will, that are working on the railroad itself. The native timber, like I said, was almost worthless as it splintered too easily, resulting in every tie and bridge timber being used had to be imported in some fashion. Ships were hurriedly chartered, and soon the discharging of all types of construction materials at the Skagway terminal took place, including quantities of dynamite, which was more effective for the construction purposes than black powder used by earlier railroad builders. Altogether, more than 450 tons of explosives were required to push the railroad to the top of this seemingly impregnable barrier that we had. Construction for the first 20 miles out of Skagway was $100,000 a mile, a staggering sum for that era of time. The first 3 miles along the Skagway River were relatively easy, however, just costing about $10,000 per mile, but soon the difficult section near Rocky Point, which is milepost 7, was encountered, and driving to cost up to more than $125,000 a mile. At Porcupine Point, a charge of 2,500 pounds of dynamite was detonated to blast off the mountainsides, which fell into the Skagway River, and it changed the course of the river, actually. But in those days, they didn't worry about those things. We got to get a railroad built to get these guys into the Yukon so they can get their gold. At Tunnel Mountain, milepost 15, we'll talk a little more about this later on. Workers were forced to lower themselves over a cliff on stout ropes, and there was scarcely footing for an eagle in order to drill holes in the sheer rock and set off explosive charges. The first 250-foot tunnel had to be drilled here on the north side of the chasm, as the road ascended a grade of 3.9%. And as we know, a model railroaders, 2% is a pretty good grade to a real railway, and here's not 3.9% that they're having to deal with to get this railroad in place. South of the tunnel, Haney's men stood on a narrow shelf, which would then support the railroad and gaze down to the river more than 1,000 feet below. Behind them, a mile downgrade, you can see a big loop known as Bridal Veil Falls, where an encampment known as the White Pass City had sprung up near the railway. At least 35 workers were killed in construction accidents before the line was completed. On July 21st, 1898, the White Pass in Yukon operated its first train from Skagway to a point 4 miles north of town. There's that 280 that we were talking about earlier, their first locomotive. On August 15th, an inspection team with a party of investors, company officials, and guests riding a flat car roped on all sides puffed all the way to the Porcupine Point, where the locomotive drew up to a very last rail laid at that time. Skagway, in a year's time, had boomed from a sleepy village to a rodacious 20,000 people. And you could clearly see it in the distance. And I can remember seeing that on the train. We got to this point, you could look back towards the bay, if you will, and you could see the ship in the harbor. And Skagway is 5 miles from the harbor point. By August 25th, trains were operating as far as Haney Station, 12.7 miles at the confluence of the Skagway River and its White Pass Fork, as the rails continued to advance rapidly up the face of the mountain. 1899 comes about, and the White Pass in Yukon had climbed from Skagway to an elevation almost 3,000 feet at the summit in just 20 miles, and it was actually 20.4 miles, as we saw in the diagram earlier, featuring steep grades of almost 3.9%. The tight grades of the narrow gauge White Pass were of the track 3 feet apart on a 10-foot wide roadbed. So this is basically a single track with a couple of passing sidings. Building the 110 miles of track was a challenge in every way, and that's the 110 miles that went all the way up to Lake Bennett, and the final point that the railroad went to. Construction required cliff-hanging turns of 16 degrees, building 2 tunnels and numerous bridges and trestles. Work in the tunnel at mile 16 took place in the dead of winter with heavy snow and temperatures as low as 60 below zero. It slowed the work quite a bit, and I can imagine that. The workers reached the summit of the White Pass on February 20th, 1899. And by July 6th of that year, construction had reached Lake Bennett and the beginning of the river and lake's route. So with that, they had to build a cantilever bridge. And this cantilever bridge, a portion of it is there. They abandoned the bridge and built another bridge behind it. We'll see that when we get to the video. But this bridge, as you can see, is a considerable challenge in terms of building. Remember, all that timber that's in that bridge had to be imported. They couldn't use the local timber due to the fact it was too brittle. So we've gotten to 3,000 feet. We've built the track. The workers met the summit. I went the wrong way, dummy. Here we go, 1900. Construction's completed now, while construction crews battled their way north laying rail. Another crew came from the north, heading south, by the way, and they met at Carcross in July 29th, 1900, where they had the ceremonial golden spike, not the Transcontinental Railroad spike, but another ceremonial golden spike, was driven by Samuel Graves, the president of the railway. And 35,000 men worked in the construction of the railroad, some for a day, others for a longer period, but all shared in the dream and the hardship. The $10 million project was a product of British financing, American engineering, and Canadian contracting. Tens of thousands of men, 450 tons of explosives overcame the harsh and challenging climate and geography to create the wonder of steel and timber. In 1954, after the gold rush, for decades, the WP and YR had carried significant amounts of ore and concentrates to Skagway to be loaded upon ore ships. During World War II, the railway was chief supplier for the U.S. Army's Alaska Highway Construction Project, they say. The railroad was operated by steam until 1954, when the transition came to diesel-electric motive power. The White Pass matured into a fully integrated transportation company operating docks, trains, stagecoaches, sleighs, buses, paddle wheels, trucks, ships, airplanes, hotels, and pipelines. In 1982, after the gold rush, the world metal prices plummeted this year and the mines closed and the WP and YR suspended operations. Then in 1988, the WP and YR reinvented itself as a tourist attraction. The line reopened in 1988 to operate as a narrow gauge excursion between Skagway and the White Pass Summit. And the active line was later extended to Bennett in the 1990s and Carcross in 2007. The picture here shows the four men that shaped the vision of the White Pass in Yukon: Samuel Graves, Mr. Hislop, Mr. Hawkins, and Mr. Henley. These are the four guys that caused this railroad to get built. I don't think the dogs had anything to do with it. That's my PowerPoint. So with that, do you have any questions? I know I went through that fairly quickly, but I was trying to give you a little bit of a history of the White Pass, and the White Pass was significant to the expansion into the Yukon Territory for us up there.
One of the things I enjoyed about our visit was we came in by cruise ship. And I think that day there were either 3 or 4 different cruise ships docked there in Skagway, and big long trains of narrow gauge cars pulled up in front of each one so that a bunch of us could hop on and ride up the line.
Yeah, I can't went in by cruise ship also, Bill. And the trains all now come down. One train comes down to the port itself. The station's a little ways up, maybe a quarter mile up the tracks, where you get off when you come back. But going up, you had to get on there. And I think we had like 10 cars, and he told me they ran 7 trains a day up there. And as a matter of fact, when we get into the video that I've got for you, you'll see the train that was in front of us. They were probably 20 minutes, maybe a half hour in front of us, but we could see them on the other side of the valley several times. And this railway, like a lot of the scenic railways you see when you're going up, you can see a situation where you're seeing your locomotive in front of you. And of course, we're running behind diesel electric. But I was just awed. The one thing that came to my mind, Bill, was the railway out in Colorado, Durango and Silverton. It reminded me a lot of that with the depths down to the river and the drop-offs, but just beautiful, beautiful country. The train was very smooth. I've ridden on the Amtrak several times, and I can say that this train was definitely a lot smoother than an Amtrak. There's no doubt in my mind.
Hey, Ernie,
Yo,
what was it about the timber that made it so brittle? Did you learn what the issue was with the local timber?
I don't know what the issue was, but I know that they told us, the host on the train told us that the trees up there, the tops of the trees will only grow in very good atmosphere. And like the tops of the trees will not grow in North America due to the pollution we have here, but in Alaska, the air is so pure that it'll grow there. And I think that the fact might be that it perhaps grows faster. And I've always heard that fast growing trees are not as strong as a slow growing tree. You know, I'm not an expert, but that's my thought. But I don't have any official reason other than the fact he just said it wasn't strong enough. It was very brittle. And I could think also just the temperatures and, you know, that you go through in the growth cycles, I think would be totally different from what they would be here in terms of, I guess, the structure of the tree itself being able to formulate has to be in a very short time frame there and doesn't get a chance to get firmed up before the freeze comes, I guess. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, and Ernie, the other thing about they have a huge forest in southeast Alaska, but the trees are very, very old there. You've got 1,500-year-old trees that are growing there, spruce trees, and the climate is extraordinarily wet in that area. I mean, there are places there it'll rain 300 inches a year. And so it's just not very conducive to producing trees that are railroad quality. We had right after the Alaska Railroad was uh, sold by the federal government to the state started requiring us to use in-state wood for trees. And so we were forced to buy 40,000 ties from the one of the sawmills down in southeast Alaska. The ties lasted about a year and a half before they had to be replaced. That was the top end of what they lasted. And they just don't do it. Those trees down there, I think they're too wet. There's too much water for them. The wood never gets hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've got some theories. John, that don't know anything about Alaska, gave us his input from his experiences up there and his 1-year-old ties he was able to use. So we've heard it from my subject matter expert on Alaska. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? And if not, I'll see if I can get this video to come up. And this video is just something I put together from very several different segments. I can say that. Now I'm going to try to get this video to come up. If I can get it to come up, here we go. There it is. Now if we can get it to play, here we go. Y'all seeing it? I hope. Can y'all hear the video on it or not?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. Well, this was built in 1947, the shop area here, he's telling us. And on the far side of Florida Mountain, but on the other side, that's the Skagway River coming down through there. And we're going to parallel the Skagway River for a while, and we're going to cross over it a couple of times. You sort of see the Skagway coming into view now through the trees. Another segment here, we're up above the Skagway now. We're actually going to be on that mountain on the other side a little while. We're going to make a big turn like you do in Altoona, sort of. In a little while, we'll see another train in front of us. Our locomotive was a black and white locomotive. The locomotive in front of us was a yellow and green locomotive. But you'll see it pop up here in a little while. And you're talking about the national forest. This is a large national forest that we go through. There's our locomotive. There's the Skagway. We're probably averaging 30 to 35 mile an hour, I would guess, at best, probably more in the 20s. But the Skagway River is fed by a glacier. We just passed mile marker 6. And once you come around this turn, you'll see the Skagway Harbor in a minute here. Right in this area here. It should come out There it is. My ship's actually there. It was 70 degrees. We're coming up to a tunnel here in a minute. The first tunnel. There's they called it the International House of Passports. That's actually the border station for the United States border folks where they did their inspections and such. But it's about 6 miles from the border with British Columbia there. They're located here to the conditions that are up at the summit. That's located on the highway. It takes you out to the Yukon Highway. You can get to the Yukon Highway from Skagway. Some of the locations like Sitka, the roads don't go there. You have to come in by water. But Skagway, you can come in. This is one of the points. This and Haynes Point, I think it was Haynes, that you could actually drive to from the United States. One of the things they were talking about was that gentleman by the name of Buchanan, who was a big coal guy, gave kids free rides on the train. There's the IHOP, as they called it. I would have paid the videographer a little bit more. I probably would have got a better videographer, but I work cheap. Now there's the road on the other side that we're talking about. Don't see a whole lot of traffic. There's the train I was talking about. So we're going to be coming up through there. We're about 20 minutes from that point. We'll catch up with them at the runaround on the other end because they have to wait for us to come up to get back. Now it's June 17th. You can see the snow is still on the higher elevations. I can also say the sun came up at 3:30 this morning. It's going to set at about 10:30 tonight.
Ernie, did they have times during the year when they were building it that they couldn't work because there just wasn't enough light?
That I don't know the answer to. It says they worked, around the clock, but I don't know. Okay, here's that first tunnel I was talking about. Finally got there. I would imagine it'd been very difficult to work on the slopes in the dark. That's probably one of the times it was 60 degrees below zero too, I suspect. There's a curve up here that the railroad named the Dead Horse Curve. That was for all the horses that were killed on this route. Trying to negotiate it one was the actual road itself and not on the inspiration point in that. We're swinging back here, and on the very far end there, that's the harbor again. We're about 12 miles out from the harbor. And the Skagway's following the valley. That's Skagway Harbor. Right there. Now here's that the cantilever bridge that we showed you the picture of, as it is today. Now look at that structure, and we're going to see the new bridge. And I want you to tell which bridge you think is the stronger bridge. I know what my thought was, but that was the original bridge there, Gulch. What gets me is just what it took to build that bridge, the efforts and the labor and getting the materials. As you can see, a lot of that was steel. And there's the new bridge up there. We'll get closer in, we'll see it. But I ask you, which bridge looks more massive? And believe it or not, we're going to go into another tunnel. And there's the Skagway down there. That's about 800 feet. There's that cantilever bridge. I imagine Greg could probably build that bridge with timbers. Now we're further up. We're seeing some quite a bit of water here from the snow melt. They told us there's no fish up here. The salmon can't work their way up. Now, I also know at the time we were there, the salmon weren't running. The otters were very disappointed down at the hatcheries. They were waiting. They told us like 15% of the salmon that are released make their way back. But the water is just so clear there. And we're about a mile from the international border with the United States and Canada at British Columbia, one of the waterfalls there. You see many of those. You're going to see a monument up here, a very small monument that marks the border. We'll get a better picture of that, I think, coming back after I make the loop. There's the monument. So we just passed into British Columbia. That's the loop coming back in. So we're going to go up here and loop around and come back. That's the Northwest Royal Canada Police station there. That's where I checked to make sure we had their 1 ton of goods. There's the other train going back. And somebody made a monument out of rock. Don't know what it is. So we've made the turn. We're on our way back now. We'll come back to that where that switch is at that kicks us over. When I post the recording of this session, I'll have a copy of the video and you'll be able to listen to the sound if you want to on that video. So now we go downhill and the brake action is plenty going down. We only got that one locomotive and that's all we got, that and the brakes on the cars. There's a small lake there. That's not Lake Bennett. Lake Bennett's further in. Yeah, we're almost done with the video here.
Yes, they will be here soon. They can do us all today.
Yeah, I don't want to show you what it look like on the inside of a tunnel. It's dark. There's the Skagway Dam. That's the second tunnel we just came back through. And we made it back without incident and things went well.
It looks like you got one of their new locomotives for your train.
Yeah, I was trying to do some research and I really couldn't find, but I guess they have a steam locomotive there that they run,
have
but
two.
we're having
two, actually.
difficulty.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
have 2 steam locomotives.
Yeah.
Yeah. and neither one were in service, so they ran diesel this day. But they ran 7 trains a day. They were telling us, and I mean, it was a great event for me. I just thoroughly enjoyed all 3 hours of it. The staff was very good to us. I mean, we didn't have any meals on there. I mean, if you wanted to get a soda, something like that, but they didn't have anything on our. So anyhow, they didn't have any meals. We were, I think we went out at 11 o'clock, if I remember right. Yeah, because I think the other train went out at 3 or something like that. There was one train ahead of us, maybe some behind us.
Ernie, where'd they get the cars for the passenger cars? Are those all reproduction or refurbished or what?
That's another question that I don't have the answer to.
Some of them are originals, some are ones they bought from other railroads, and a lot of them are reproductions that they've made themselves in their own shop.
Yeah, they have built probably 15 or 20 new passenger cars in the last 20, 30 years up there. Some of them in their own shops and some of them at a shop in Washington State.
Yeah, but they're made to look old. They're maybe new, but they're built on that old style.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm reading their little pamphlet book here, and it's saying that they have 2 vintage steam locomotives, 20 diesels from various decades, 92 passenger cars, and an array of track maintenance equipment. And they go on to say that they have recreated some of the cars, as John was saying, but they don't. In a little book here they give to you, they didn't talk about the cars themselves and what they got and what they did and such.
Is that one of the biggest tourist railroads in the United States?
Probably in terms of volume of passengers, it's may not be the largest, but it's near it, because there'll be years when they do 300, 400,000 passengers on it in the summer.
I would imagine Durango and Silverton and the what's the other one down in North Carolina? Smoky Mountain Railroad.
Yeah.
Or the two that might have a chance, but the other ones out in Colorado, those narrow gauge out in Colorado, I'm sure are very competitive with being right up in there with being the most ridden or most seeked, if you will.
Yeah, it's particularly with the big cruise ships, it's just dumped huge crowds onto White Pass.
Well, Bill was saying that there was ships in the harbor the day he got there. We got there, we were one of 6 ships in the harbor. I mean, Skagway was just nuts. Yeah. Very difficult to move about. I mean, you got traffic circles, but you couldn't go very fast because those pedestrians, they don't pay no dang attention to signals. Well, that's what I have for you. Who else has got something they want to talk about or questions or whatever?
I don't know if you can if I can share, but I've got some pictures. I rode the White Pass on May 30th of this year and had a little bit different adventure than you had. Is it possible to share a screen so I can show you some of my pictures?
Sure. I'll Phil, I don't know. Do you want to keep the host? You want me to try to take it back, or?
I just gave it back to you. So, and I think as far as I remember, it's already set for everyone can share. I had to do that in order for you to keep sharing after you made me host. It's
still set to share, so you should be able to go to your share screen.
Okay, I'm at share screen.
There you go. You're up.
Okay. All right. So
that's a train that was in front of me.
Yeah. That's my cruise ship in the background there. This is May 30th of this year. There were the same type of thing that you had, lots of trains going out. These are the 3000 class diesels right now. But I was on a train that was going to leave at 7:45 in the morning and was going to go all the way to Carcross. And then we were going to get a bus ride back from Carcross. And I say we were because you'll hear about what happened. So
best plans.
The other trains with the 3000 class diesels were all just going up to that loop at White Pass and coming back down. So this is my train. We got the 2 shovel nose diesels, 90 and 91, which date back to 1954, 55, the oldest diesels on the railroad. You see the gray container car in between the passenger coaches. That was a refrigerated container that held our lunches because we were going to have lunch on the train. And we had about 6 or 8 cars on the train as we were going up. And again, the 2 shovel nose diesels up front. It's quite a treat, the old diesels. And some of the, just a couple scenery shots. There's the track below us. This was at milepost 14, approximately up just before the tunnel and the trestle before the first tunnel. You see the conductor and the engineer down there on the ground, and the engineer is crawling underneath the train. We're on a very steep cliffside here, and eventually the conductor comes walking back through the train. The lead diesel locomotive had broken an axle at milepost 14. They eventually uncoupled us from the lead locomotive and left it there. And we backed all the way back down into Skagway from milepost 14. Here's our train going back to Skagway. And we had the same situation you had following us. Well, actually 3 other trains. Here's one of the trains, again, with the 3000 class diesels. They've got some painted in this black, red, and white scheme, and some in the green and yellow. They're both all the same class. But this was at milepost 12.7 or Henny. There's a passing siding there, and there were 2 trains that we passed there. In the case of both trains, what they had to do, they could only go up to 12.7. They would run around their trains and put their engines then on the downside and back all the way back down to Skagway. And they did that for the rest of the day. This is our train back down in Skagway with the lone diesel. I got to talking to the engineer of the train, and he invited me up into the cab. This is what the cab looks like inside one of those GE diesels.
Cool.
And he even let me sit in the engineer's seat and take my picture. So I spent a little bit of the time in Skagway, and then I got to ride one of the other trains up to milepost 12.7. So this is going up, and we're passing a train coming down. And so this is going to be a rare view that you're not going to see every day on the White Pass, a train running long hood forward. But all the trains that day were, from then on, none of them made it all the way to White Pass. They were only going up to milepost 12.7. The engines would run around their train and then pull the train long hood forward back to Skagway. Just some of the scenery. All right, now, can you see my arrow coming across? Right in the center of the screen, do you see my arrow? I don't know.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, do you see the little green and yellow dot up there? And below it, a couple orange dots, and then a couple of white dots. Those, the green and yellow is our locomotive. That's where we broke down. And the 2 orange dots are 2 motor cars, and then 2 high rail pickup trucks. This is in the afternoon. They'd all gone up there to try and get this locomotive repaired well enough that they could bring it back down to Skagway. So yeah, there. Can you see it better now? I've zoomed in. Do you see the locomotive?
Yes, and we can see the
Yes.
truck.
Okay.
Yep, can see
Now I
the
got-
high rails. Yeah, easily
Yeah,
see the high rails.
Glenn, I guess the broken axle prevented that.
The what?
The broken axle prevented them from just pulling it back down with one of the other trains, I guess.
Right. They didn't dare move it because they said the wheels were barely on the track, and they were really afraid would derail if they moved it. So I don't know how they exactly fixed it. I never did hear more about it. This is downtown Skagway, one of the old buildings restored by the Park Service. So yeah, that basically that was these are some of the old buildings in Skagway. I don't know if I have. Yeah, and this one sort of is interesting too, because the locals, the U.S. Army invades Skagway. Of course, Skagway is actually part of the United States. So, but the locals considered that they were invaded by the U.S. Army when the Army moved in and took over the railroad in 1942 to supply the construction of the Alaska Highway through British Columbia, Yukon, and into Alaska. So yeah, that's about all I have to share. But I just thought you might be interested in a slightly different adventure on the White Pass.
Thank you. That was nice to see something different. Yeah.
You could definitely see the slope on that one slide you had with where the locomotive was there, and it gives you an appreciation of that 3.9% that they were encountering in some locations.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
assuming your camera's level.
yeah, no, that was quite a grade going up there. We were looking when we were stopped up there, and they were looking at the locomotive, looking out the other side. You're looking almost straight down and over on the other side of the valley, and you could see that I've got a lot more pictures, but you could see the train on the other side of the valley, waiting for us to get out of the way, or at least get up all the way to White Pass. Because once we stopped, they actually were closer to us, and they actually had to back down to the siding at Annie at 12 points, milepost 12.7, because they were actually had come across the bridge there and were maybe about a mile behind us when we stopped.
The other thing that I saw was down near Skagway itself. They have done blasting, and they're going to put a passing siding in, I guess, on the Lake Bennett side of Skagway, about a mile up the track. They were trying to get about a mile of passing siding. They're hoping to do this fall, but they had the blasting done. And they just need to go in there and do the excavation to put in to give them another passing siding. Well, thank you for sharing. That was great. Who else has got slides of Alaska?
I don't have any slides, but I did do an Alaska cruise, and one of the things that was particularly interesting to me was Gold Dredge number 3. Part of the thing is they give you a pan and a scoop of mud, and you then sit there and pan. And so I'm there with my pan and my scoop of mud, panning away, and I'm thinking, this is lame. And I'm panning away and thinking, this is lame. And I'm panning away, and then I see this glint of gold, and suddenly I got it. You think about the society that people lived in those days, and how, upward mobility was much more challenging than today. But boy, you make a strike of gold up there, you're going to live different from how you used to. And it brought clear to me what these guys had in mind, though I guess basically most of them didn't achieve much.
Yeah.
Well, certainly a challenge. And, they were talking about the Army invading in 1942, and I think I'm right on this. Alaska wasn't a state yet. They were.
Oh, no.
So I guess we did invade a territory of our country, if you will. But people were not expecting the lower 48 people to be up there, I'm sure. Anything else? Anything else to share? Any questions?
Yeah, Glenn, I'm curious, did they compensate the people on your train that didn't get to complete the journey in any way?
Yeah, we got a full refund.
Okay.
For the car cross trip. The other folks that were riding, because I know this because I again rode a train in the afternoon that only went up to 12.7 with my wife and my brother and niece, who were also along on the trip. They weren't going to ride all the way to Carcross. That was my thing. They were walking. They were surprised to see me at noon back in Whitehorse, because I was supposed to be gone for the whole day, not getting back till 4 o'clock. And they were riding a 1 o'clock train, and I was able to get a ticket on that. Those folks all got to ride for basically half fare. They refunded half their fare because they got to go up to 12.7, which is approximately halfway up to the 20.4 point where the train turns around. So the railroad you didn't have to go in and ask or anything. They just did that automatically.
I was on the Western Mail and Scenic way back in the 90s with the family, and we got a couple miles before you hit Frostburg, and the lead pilot on 734 derailed. It had hit a small tree that fell across the tracks. So we were stuck there. They brought lunches down from the station up at Frostburg and then pulled us back down with the diesel. And not only did they give us a refund, they gave us another set of tickets for another ride someday, which we took advantage of. So it's nice when they do that.
And Glenn got a tour of the locomotive itself.
Yeah, that was, and I guess a little bit of a bonus. I would have rather gone. I eventually did make it to Carcross, but not on the train. The trip I was on was a complete circle. It was a cruise and then a circle of Alaska up through Denali and Fairbanks, then over to Dawson City and Whitehorse and Carcross. We actually got to Carcross before we flew back to the States. And did get to see the setup in Carcross. No train was there at the time, but I did get to walk around Carcross a little bit. Also got to see a very interesting railroad, or the remains of it, the Klondike Mines Railroad in Dawson City, another 3-foot narrow gauge that ran for about 35 miles out of Dawson City up Bonanza Creek, where all the gold was discovered. And it only ran from 1906 to 1913, but it's got a fairly good distinction. It had 4 steam locomotives. All 4 are still in existence. 3 of them are in a museum in Dawson City, and one, somebody told me where it is, but one is actually still periodically used on tourist railroads somewhere in the United States.
Cool.
And one other thing to mention is that although White Pass is not operating beyond Carcross right now, unless it's changed in the last couple of years, the railroad is still intact all the way into Whitehorse.
Yeah, I can verify that because I was in Whitehorse in early June, about a week and a half later on the end of our circle trip. And the track and the station are very much intact. And in fact, the White Pass and Yukon Railroad actually has a ticket agent in the station where you can actually arrange to get a ticket to not to ride out of Whitehorse, but to ride out of Skagway if you wish to.
Yep.
Well, very good. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about? I can't believe a bunch of model railroaders together got nothing to talk about on a railroad. Wow.
Well, if we can talk about model railroading,
Certainly. This
I
thing's wide open. There's no agenda.
last weekend I went to Mainline and I bought myself a Woodland Scenics static grass applicator. And I must have watched 20 videos on YouTube, and I don't know what those guys are doing that I'm not, but I have not had any success with it yet.
They're applying grass.
I'm just wondering if anybody has had good experience with one of those.
I've never used one, so I have no idea.
No, I will figure it out. It may
I,
take.
u- I
Greg?
used one once before. The trick is you actually have to vacuum the grass when you're done. It doesn't end up like 90 degrees vertical after you apply it. It sort of looks sort of bad news. You look at it and you go, what the heck? This isn't what it's supposed to be. Well, then you take a little vacuum thing with some filter on the end of your little vacuum hose, and you very gently vacuum all that stuff up. And now instead of being semi-vertical, now it suddenly goes horizontal. Or excuse me, now instead of being semi-horizontal, it goes sort of vertical. So that's the only thing I can tell you. Because yeah, when I first did it, I was like, this really sucks.
I'll give that a try. I had a kind of low powered vacuum that I was picking up the extra grass with, and a couple of the videos talked about that, and I tried using it, but it didn't seem to have much effect. I'll try a more powerful one.
Hey, Greg, we had a clinic, early one at Jerry's Hobby Barn, applying static grass. You might go to the Potomac Division website, look
Okay.
at past clinics, and if nothing else, see who presented that clinic, and you might reach out directly to them, and they might be able to talk you through specifics, if there's a 15th step thing that you're doing with your left hand instead of the right hand, one of those issues. But it worked great at the clinic. We were all having a blast with it.
Yeah, I agree with Ken. That's where I used it the first time, and then I eventually used it at home. I think it's that fellow who lives in Falls Church, because I was at his home layout one time.
Do you remember what length grass it was you guys were having success with?
We used a variety. We
Yeah.
kind of mixed it together. The longest maybe was a quarter inch, maybe.
Okay, I've got the 2 millimeter, 4 millimeter, and 7 millimeter.
That sounds familiar.
The 2 millimeter is all that I experimented with. And I don't know if maybe it's just so short I can't tell if it's standing up or not.
You can get a microscope out and look at it. I mean, 2 millimeter, great, Googa Mooga. I'd be lucky to see it on the layout.
Maybe 1.9 is stuck in the glue.
Yeah, that could. I'll look that up and play with it some more. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
No problem. Anybody
Hey,
else
Bill,
have any?
I have a question for Bill Mosteller. It's a decal question. So if I see where you can get decal paper and people sell white ink, how do you actually get that to work though with your printer? Do you have to get a cartridge from that will match your printer, an empty one, and fill it up? Or how does that actually work?
Sorry, haven't a clue.
Figured. I know you don't
you-
actually produce them, but you kind
Yeah,
of do all the other.
Years ago, a coworker asked me, "Well, what's your role in the business?" And without hesitation, I said, "Writing checks." But that's not quite true. The real business is deciding to write checks. I used to be doing silk screening, but that seems to be passé. And I'm now dealing with people who have machines that I guess are like very fancy printers. And their trick is that they do use white ink. But such things are not generally available, I think. I think you need special high class gear to be able to do that.
I know at one time Matt Thompson had an Elps printer, and he was able to print those white decals, but I think he started having difficulty. I think either his printer went bad or you couldn't get parts or something, but I think the Elps printers are pretty hard to find now, as I remember.
Yeah, I'd heard they were special printers that you could put a white cartridge in. And I think a way around that is there's some kind of white decal paper that you can print other colors on too. And that gives you your white, but I'm not familiar with it.
Well, I know we've got clear paper, clear decal paper. I know there's white decal paper. I bought the wrong paper once. But the white, trying to get it to be the white you want, and basically what doing is painting on a white paper, so you have to be able to match, I guess, the background, if you will, so that the decal will come off, so you can see the decal, so you can blend in. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Sort of a fade kind of thing, and I think that'd be challenging. That might be a good clinic for us to look at if we can find some expert on printing decals with a laser jet printer and the like.
Yeah,
I know with mine, when I try to print decals with the clear paper, that I print them, but then I get, if I print on 8.5 by 11, I'll get maybe 2 sets printing one, because the print sticks on the whatever's in there that turns. It doesn't clean, and that's telling me that the ink is not drying fast enough. And I don't know if there's a way to turn the heat up on the LaserJet printer to make it dry faster or not. I mean, it seems to be something that could be done, but I'm IT okay, but not IT. No, I'm not ID 10T, but you can print that down and figure out what that means if you don't know what ID 10T is. But I don't know enough about it to know if it'd be dangerous. That's what I could say. Just like websites, I know enough to be dangerous to keep the website running. Okay, anybody else have anything else? Any other questions? All righty, well, I thank you all for coming. I just want to remind you a couple of things. Tuesday night, the board meeting. which you go to the website, there's a link there if you want to come to the board meeting. Our next virtual event is scheduled for September 15th. You may be wondering what happened to the hobby barn. It didn't burn down. It didn't fall down. It's become a storage lot for G-scale. I can say that we have a lot of G-scale stuff out there that one of our former members, Mr. Adams, passed away a couple of years ago, and we inherited his G-scale stuff, and our intent was try to sell it and raise some money. And G-scale doesn't seem to be selling very well, so we're working on it. We sold a little bit of it, but still have a lot of it there, and it's taking up space that is needed. And Jerry's had some other things going on in his life, health and family related, that have been working, but he isn't working on a new room out there that I guess in his house now that will become the clinic barn, I guess he'll call it. I'm not sure what he'll call it, but that's what's going with the hobby barn. So we haven't been scheduling anything out there, and the fact is we haven't had a lot of people coming forward to offer clinics. So if you have a clinic you'd like to present or have an interest in doing a clinic, let me know and we can get you scheduled. We have plenty of openings, as you'll see if you go to our website. The MER in Durham is October 17th to the 20th. George and I will be going down with some other characters from the Potomac Division. Alex, can't forget Alex. Rob Rodriguez, Martin, and some others will be down there doing clinics. But looks like they have a pretty good program from what I've seen. And the room rate was $79 a night, and that was a heck of a rate for a Marriott, just recently refurbished. I don't know if that room rate's still there or not, though. It's getting close. They had a cutoff. But you go to the website, you can see whether it is if you have an interest. And let's see, the MARPM in Baltimore is September 8th. I think September 8th to the 10th for those of you that like to go to those types of events. And I know they're looking for more people to come. They're back at the hotel there at BWI where they were before. They have plenty of room, Bernie tells me, so just passing that along. It's not an NMRA event, but there will be some evaluations available there. If you want to have something evaluated, you can contact Martin and let him know, and it can be done up there. So that's what I've got for y'all.